I guess it's gonna have to work.
Some of these pencils need to be sharpened. Alright, so when we do journals, we're gonna put all of our electronics away so we can focus on our writing skills. Everybody ready? Transition into journal writing? Alright. So I just want to draw your attention to the board today. We're going to talk about making connections. It's a reading comprehension skill. So to improve your reading scores, whenever we do reading tests, right, when you're understanding a text, one of the things you can do is make connections. So we're going to talk about it, all the different ways. In your journals, today is Wednesday, May 21st. Making sure you label the date helps me help you get your points. Today we practice reading comprehension strategies, and today you can determine the central idea of a text. Learning target, all students can determine the central idea of a text. We're going to learn reading comprehension strategy to make that easier. Open your journals. Lily's ready. You're ready. Lily's ready. You're ready. Monte's ready. This is reading the top part. Alright, so for journals, we're going to do 10 minutes of writing. Remember, the goal is to try to write for the full time. So after reading Illegal, our comic book that we went through, and learning about Ebo's journey, this one's really complicated of a question. So how can learning someone's immigration story help us understand the complexity of global migration? So migration is movement from one place to the other. So how can it help us understand global migration and the emotional and physical challenges for the human beings involved? So basically, how can learning someone's immigration story help us? So Ebo went through emotional and physical challenges throughout his journey. His emotional challenges, he was looking for his brother, right? They were constantly stopped again and again. He had to be creative, he had to be resilient to figure out how to flip the boat over, how to look for water, how to follow the tracks of the truck, right? There was a lot of emotional toil. Physical challenges of the desert, physical challenges of the ocean, right, that he had to go through. All the emotion of losing his brother, finding his sister. He went through a whole lot when he went from one place to the other. So how can learning someone's immigration story help us? What is it about Ebo's journey that helps you understand the complexity of emotion, the complexity of physical challenges? It Anybody have any questions about that? Everybody ready to write? Do countdown timer, 10 minutes. Remember the goal is to write for the full time. Try to come up with at least 5 sentences. How can learning someone's immigration story help us? We learned about his journey. Now we have a better understanding of what it means to move from one place to the other. Yes, you can write about the book. Because what is it about his journey that helps us learn more about the human complexities? What did you learn from Ego's journey? You can write that down. That'll count. After we do this lesson, I'll let you go. We'll pause. How can learning Ego's story help us? Wednesday, May 21st. So in this journal, you're making the connection of the immigrant story and why it's important for us to be learning about it. Think about, what do people think about immigrants already? What are some stereotypes or myths about immigrants? Why is learning their story important? Does it shift our understanding? Good job getting something on paper. Remember, the goal is to keep writing for the full time. And even if you run out of room of things to say, you can just clear out your head. What are your thoughts? What are your feelings? What do you have going on right now? You can practice these writing skills. Welcome to Miss Lewis. gets us going. Thank you for taking that time to write, taking the time to think and ink. So let's share. Anybody want to talk about what they wrote? What is it about learning about an immigrant story that can help us? Can I look at it? Yeah, good, excellent. About caring about other people, caring about their safety, right? If they're sick, if they're injured, or how to keep survival. This idea that there's caring going on. And it concerns for safety. What is it? Yeah, so like what is it about learning about his journey that can help us understand people? So we learn that people are caring, that it has to do with safety. Yeah, he's resourceful, right? They're looking around. Resourceful for survival. Water, shelter, food, that sort of stuff. Right? He's making connections with people. Y'all remember when they're on that big boat and he's learning about all these people's stories? What is it that was everybody's story? How were they all similar? You remember that question? They're all like, I just want to find a job. I just want to go find my family. I just want a life. I had to leave for war. I had to leave for this. Right? They're all. Let's see. How do we want to say that? That they'll do anything, right, to be able to continue on their journeys. Just for the sake of living, right? That's all they want to do, is be able to continue their lives. So it's not criminal activity, right? The name of the book, illegal. They're just trying to survive. Alright. So let's expand our discussion real quick. So we talked about journeys, right? Going from one place to the other, but there's a change that happens.
someone goes on a journey. So migration is similar. It's movement from one place to the other. But why do people migrate? And what factors influence the decision to leave their homes, risking their lives? And then what's the difference between fleeing, leaving, and moving? So in Evo's story, his decision to leave was because his brother was already gone, right? His brother left. But then his brother's decision to leave was because the sister left. But do we know why the sister left? Didn't say, right? So there are many different reasons. There could be a reason for the sister to migrate, that she was looking for a particular job to take care of the family, to earn money. But for Evo, it was about sticking together. He needed to be with his family. That's what the important part of it was. And then when he was with his friends, right, the people he met along the way, the importance was them sticking together in order to survive. And then we met more people who were also choosing to leave for risking their lives, right? They're not just moving for the sake of fun, to switch schools. There's a bigger reason, right? So as we're talking about migration, we want to talk about the differences here and about fleeing, leaving, and moving. If someone's just moving, what do you think about? Gary, what comes in your head when someone's just moving? They're like, oh, I'm going to move this weekend. Find a real job. Does moving seem like a super serious thing or just like a casual thing? On what? Yeah. What about if someone said, I have to flee the country tonight? How is that different from just someone's like, oh, I'm going to move this weekend? Yeah, that's so good. So like moving, right? There's this sense of planning. I'm gonna write that in there. So like with moving, there's planning, there's scheduling, right? You get to think ahead about what's going on. But if you have to flee, for fleeing, it's impulsive. They're like on the run, right? It's quick. There's not as much planning that's involved in that. That's awesome. All right, so let's make more connections. Some ways we can do this is text to text. So another, from one story to the next. So what does illegal remind you of? Another story, a movie, a song. And then to yourself, text to self. So what about Evo's story resonates within you? And then text to world. What do you understand, right? Connect. What does that remind you of other things? All right, so our little sticky notes. We're gonna try this out. So we're gonna make connections with text to text. So how do the ideas in illegal remind you of another text, another story, another book, another movie, another song? Right, this could be because it's in the desert, because it's in the ocean, or just in general, the story he has to go to as he's going from one side of the desert to the other, one side of the ocean to the other. So what other story does it remind you of? After reading illegal, what other story does it remind you of? And this could be a video game, it could be a song, it could be a romance movie, it could be a horror movie. Making connections with another story. What does the illegal story remind you of? And we're going to put a 5-minute timer on this one to make this connection together. So for me, I'm thinking it kind of reminds me of Titanic, because of when the boat capsizes. It also kind of reminds me of The Lion King, because he goes from thinking everything's happy and fun to learning things are like real serious, right? Yeah. So, you can start out these sentences to get you started to help. What I just read reminds me of blank, because blank, the ideas in this text are similar to the ideas in this other thing, because the ideas in this text are different than the ideas in illegal because. So these sentences can help you just frame it. What does it remind you of? Illegal reminds you of what? What other story? What other text? I'll do 5 minutes. On your little sticky note. Delonte, you wanna wake up? Keep going with the. Keep it up, keep it up. Delonte, don't go sleep yet. You can do it, you can do it. Right there. What other story does illegal remind you of? Whether because they're on a boat, in the ocean. Can I write on this one? You said? No way to write on this one. What other story does illegal remind you of? Well, was something else, like Titanic's not an immigrant movie, that's what it reminded me of.
First of all, they weren't immigrants. They were not immigrants. They were just people that wanted to go to a different country.
Yeah,
What's the difference?
but then we had the big boat of all the different people that were going, and the whole time it's following the trail of what people have to do when they're leaving. And they have to go through like military checks, and they have to try to sneak by. They risk death.
So this is what do you expect to know about the understanding of the forest?
Well, what about, what's a recent movie that you watched? Didn't you say you saw Final Destination?
That was completely different. That's not immigrant. No, that's where people are passed down like curse.
So in the beginning, right, Evo is saying, maybe I am cursed. You know how he's like, there can only be one person, the other person has to stay behind. 2 brothers can't be on here. And he's like cheating death over and over and over and over again.
So they try to cheat that one time, and then they all.
See, you could write that down. Reminds you of Final Destination.
No. These people are white. This name is black.
What about the differences then? It's not like this movie because. I mean, you literally just said that. You can write that down. Inspired. You want me to describe it for you?
No, I don't want to say something before I go to sleep. The paper's gonna kick in.
Very good. That's addiction. Just about a minute left. Any connection, any movie, you can just write the title, and just draw a picture. What'd you say, Salem? What was the story that remembered you? What other story does that remind you of though? What other story? What's a recent thing you watched? Well, we watched Lion King together, right? You put that one down. What'd you say? Frozen? How's that remind you of Frozen? Yeah, that's a really good one. Anna was looking for her sister. So in the same way that Evo was looking for his brother and sister in the movie Frozen. Yeah. That's a good one. So we got Titanic, Lion King, Frozen. And then, even though Kiari, what'd you write down?
I don't know. Write down, I don't know, but I'm gonna put down Final Destination, because you were telling me about that movie.
Right, connections to other stories. It helps us understand. So when you are taking these tests and doing these things, asking you to make connections, you can do that with other stories. Doesn't have to be necessarily another book. It can even be a song. Alright, so moving on from text to text, we're going to do text to self. So what does it remind you of yourself? The whole story of Evo's journey. It reminds you of a time when you did something. Do you agree with what you wrote or with what you read? Kiari was saying she didn't think it was really an immigrant story because they were just decided to leave. They weren't necessarily fleeing from war like some of the other characters were. So text to self. I always said I don't know if I would have been as resilient as Evo was. Would you have known to follow the tracks? Would you have known to flip the boat over, to stay calm, to help your buddies stay calm? Was there a time when you had to make a decision? Keep going, keep going. Stay awake. Alright. So how do the ideas in this text relate to your own life, your own ideas and experiences? Would you have, if you knew that your brother and your sister were gone, would you want to have the same feeling of staying together? Right? That was something that was very important throughout the story, staying together. Would that be the same way you would think about it? Or would you be like, oh, he's fine on his own? Right? What kind of things were similar? What might have been different? So let's do 5 minutes on this one too. Making connections with your own life. How is this story similar to your own life? How is it different? What were you saying earlier? That they weren't immigrants because what? What were you saying earlier about how it's not really an immigrant story? Because why? What is similar about Eva and me? How are you two similar? How about this one? If you all saw a dead person in a truck, would you go in that truck to look for water? Well, they buried him, right? I wonder how. Disturb the dead, maybe. to decide the central idea of illegal, and then I'll just do this for you. So there's two more. So what you got? Did you want to go under, did it look over the page or? The book tipped over? Oh my gosh.
You got this.
Did you have to have like a rescue team come save you? Oh my gosh. Alright, good job making connections to self. What'd you say, Lily? You've never gone through something like that. Yeah, I've never had to go through that kind of seriousness. My life is pretty much chill. Most I get into would be like a traffic jam. Right? And even with losing somebody, usually there's a whole community there for you versus for them, it was just their small little group that they had together. Alright, let's keep going. Text to world. Let's go back to the orange ones. How do the ideas in this text relate to the larger world? So you can talk about the past, what's going on right now. You can talk about how it might end up in the future, right? What does it remind you of in the world? So our story was about someone going from one side of Africa across the Sahara Desert. Then they get to the spot towards the Mediterranean Sea, and then they try to cross the ocean. But there are lots of migration stories. We read a lot about South America to North America, from different Asian countries, from war, when people have to flee because of war. We hear all the time right now about stuff about the border. What is it about the story illegal that reminds you of things in the world? What's that story remind you of in the whole big old world? Our border crisis. To remind you of other survival stories. In the very, very, very beginning of our year, we did a unit on qualities of survival. We talked about a zombie apocalypse. Does something in this story remind you of something bigger in the world? We talked about Ada Blackjack and having to survive in Antarctica. Or was it Alaska? In the cold. Right, so 5 minutes in the world. How does that illegal remind you of bigger things in the world? With migration, with journeys. So we did with other stories, with your own experience. Now think bigger. Mary, what's this remind you of in the world?
Nothing.
Alright, so last thing, we're making all these connections with other stories about having to find families stay together, about journeys, making connections with yourself and experiences you've gone through, right? Being in a boat with a family member and it tipping over, having to be rescued, and then text to the world, our border crisis, or just talking about travel in general. So, learning about illegal and making these connections to other stories, within yourself and the world. What do you think is the central idea of the text? What is the main idea of illegal? What is the main idea? Based on making connections that we just did, right? What is the main idea, the central idea of illegal? What is the main idea? Last one. What is the main idea? What is the central idea of the text for illegal? So we started out with journals, talking about migration, what we can learn from a migrant story, right? We can learn how to be resourceful, how to have survival. We can learn that they're caring, that it's about their safety. We can, and then we talked about connections with other migrant stories, or other connections about families and needing to stay together, and other experiences is about survival and journeys. So we talked about journeys, migration, being resourceful, survival, sticking together, and the importance of learning about immigrant stories. So what do you think is the central idea of the book? Okay, 5 minutes. What is the main idea? We need to determine the main idea just from making connections. Kiara, if you can tell me the main idea of the text, I'll let you go miss this. Girl, you know.
What? Are you with your sister?
Expand it a little bit more. What is the main idea of the story? Yeah, that now. Good. You got that exit ticket for me? Exit ticket, exit ticket. Looking for his brother.
Family is sticking together. She said you can come down.
You can go.
She said you can come down. Put it on our wall over here.
I'm gonna move this. Exit ticket one. that. Stick together and don't get lost. Good. Learning about that story, right? Learning about his immigrant story helps us know that we all gotta stay together. Important to learn an immigrant's story. But I guess I'll just put it back over here and we'll clear out some board space. What'd you say, Lily? Maybe it's taking care of the people that care about the most and staying together. Good. I like how you restated the question with the central idea is. Good job. Good job, everybody. Everybody determined the central idea of the text after making connections with another text, with the self and world.